Hello again. Welcome to part 2 of the Person-Centered Theory podcast. If you're viewing this first, of course you want to go back and view part 1. We will actually pick up to where we left off the last time. I also want to take this opportunity to encourage anyone that had any questions to please communicate via the discussion board on Blackboard, and I'd be happy to answer those questions for you. So just to recap, we were speaking last time about Carl Rogers, a theorist that lived in the 1900s that was able to come up with a new theory that centered on the client, and we are going to go over the major tenets and principles of that theory right now. So if you bear with me just a second, we will skip ahead to the slides that we want to cover in this one. Okay, so we left off right here. If you take a look at one of the biggest things that person-centered theory centers in on is the relationship between the counselor and the client. This is perhaps the biggest determinant of success in counseling according to the person-centered theory. Of course, I would say that in any theory, this is probably somewhat true, that there has to be a good rapport between the counselor and the client. But in this theory, it is absolutely key. The relationship itself is based on equality. The counselor and the client are equal. This, of course, is very familiar to what we spoke about in Adler, and you will see most person-centered theorists and practitioners of person-centered therapy will most likely be sitting in two chairs facing one another to balance the power, because the client needs to feel that connection with the counselor during this therapy. The one thing that really needs to be expressed here is that this relationship is built over time. It's very important to note that the counseling that takes place in person-centered theory takes a while. It is not something that occurs overnight. The counselor must be patient with this. Again, we're not giving advice. We're facilitating an inward journey that the client will embark on. And this could take definitely some time. There has to be patience. Again, another Adler principle that we spoke about in class comes up. It is holistically based. That is to say that the client is viewed incomplete. So oftentimes person-centered theorists would have their clients go out and get a physical. They would ask about some other things going on in their lives. Person-centered theorists feel that there is an interconnectedness between what is going on within the client. Finally, the relationship itself definitely has to be healthy. There needs to be a good rapport with the client, and that will in itself promote the growth and change that the client is searching. Of course, the healthy relationship itself needs to be very caring, and we will speak about this a little bit more, but the counselor needs to hold the client in a high regard. Now, in his On Becoming a Person, Carl Rogers came up with the therapeutic core conditions that must exist for change to take place, for this journey to take place between the counselor and client. These are laid out, and in fact, I did check the text. Corey's text does have a nice write-up of these, so it won't take too long. But, of course, two individuals must be in contact with one another. Of course, this could be more in the group setting, which we will see later, that Rogers does apply his therapy into the group setting. The client needs to be in a state of incongruence. We will talk about that in the next slide or two. The counselor is in a state of congruence. The counselor has unconditional positive regard, which we will also go into. The counselor has empathy, something else that we will talk about, the different types of empathy that a person-centered counselor might have. And finally, the client is actually able to recognize these qualities that the counselor shares with them. That is, of course, very important, because if the client themselves does not focus in on the caring nature of the relationship and of the willingness for the counselor to work with them towards change, then this will never work. The client themselves has to be receptive towards the counselor and the methods. And of course, at the very end, I put this, it's a shared journey between both individuals. The counselor will go into the inward journey with the client. This is not something that is just done, singularly. It is a group effort. Okay, so continuing onward, we see the slide here talking about the differences between someone that is met with congruence and someone that has incongruence. And you can kind of think about this in a math equation. I always think about that. As you see, congruence is again equal at harmony, and incongruence would be that it does not fit together. So as you can see, this one-way sign, both going the opposite way here, that's an easy way to think of someone in incongruence. So first let's cover the congruence section, and that would be the counselor themselves. The counselor is basically a person that has self-actualized. I know we spoke about this before with the Maslow's hierarchy of needs in the previous podcast. The self-actualization is basically becoming the person that you have always truly wanted to become. It is not someone that is living in regards to other people's expectations. A congruent person has complete positive self-regard for themselves. They have self-confidence. They feel that they are living in accordance with who they are and who they basically always want to become. So, Rogers termed this as the real self. This is someone that is living as the person that they want. They have envisioned themselves as this, and they're basically content and happy with who they are. They're comfortable in their skin, and they really don't care that much of what other people are thinking about them. That's important. They have that positive self-regard for themselves. They have fully actualized. I like this right here. The congruency is the you that one has wished to become. And of course, something that you will always see in your reading pop up in Carl Rogers is genuineness. Again, when you hear genuineness, that is someone that is fully authentic. And I think that's a very important aspect for any counselor to have. You need to treat people with genuineness as well as the kindness and other tools, but the genuineness is really important. The clients can see this, that you are truthful with them no matter what. And here's some, just at the very end of the congruent side, the counselor themselves, or the person, once they get there of course, is living fully authentically. They feel real. They feel true to themselves, and they're generally happy. And again, a statement to sum up congruence for me would be I am. Now on the other side, incongruence of course is going to be pretty much the complete opposite of this. Someone that is incongruent is actually out of sync of who they really truly wish to become. This is someone that is in more ways than one basically living their life in expectation of society or others, or how they feel they should be living instead of who they truly are. And of course this happens quite some time. I see this a lot of times in my work with teenagers. They see someone else doing something, and people follow the pack. And Rogers would say a state of incongruence will start there. Again, the person becomes out of sync of who they wish to become. And instead of the real self, it is actually a term called an ideal self is formed. An ideal self is when someone basically is living because of the expectations of society or others, or they get some type of idea into their mind and it breaks them off their course of living authentically. In this regard, they are not living like themselves. So, the big key here is expectations. They are not happy, okay? They're always searching for some other type of release, some other, feelings of acceptance for others. So, if you see this again, incongruent people are not real. They're trying to meet standards that are not realistic, and they're not truly wanted by the person themselves. And again, the congruence, the statement was I am. Incongruence would be I should or I could be. I should do this. I should. It's not really what they are. Now this chart that I was able to devise up actually here is sums up the congruence. You see on the left side now, if someone is incongruent, the key to look at here is the middle, okay? And that would be where you would want to be. The self-image here is actually different because you have the ideal self and the self-image are basically smaller here. Okay? This is someone that's not living truly to themselves. There's very little overlap, and of course here the self-actualization is going to be pretty difficult. It's going to be tough to occur because they are not truly authentic. Now on the right hand side you do see the ideal self, and here also, this would be the real self, is now you see in the self-image, it's really entwined closely with each other. This person is happy, they feel that they are really reaching their potential, they are content with where they're at, and what you're going to see here is this person could probably self-actualize pretty easily. So that is congruence. The next major tenet and huge factor for the counselor to have for the client is something that Rogers would call unconditional positive regard. Now, I look at this way, this is very close to just love, I would say. It would be acceptance. I actually would like to think that Rogers took this from his strict religious upbringing. You could see a lot of, now Rogers was raised Protestant, but the Christian principle of love one another as I have loved you, that kind of falls in line with this unconditional positive regard. And this is another great tool for a counselor to practice, of course, with their clients. It's not easy, but it's excellent. What unconditional positive regard is that the counselor holds a very deep caring for the client. They want the client to change. They actually will always stand by that no matter what the circumstances. And it's a caring acceptance, a valuing, an appreciation for the client. And this really will enhance the relationship, which hinges on the success of the counseling. So to have this unconditional positive regard is absolutely key for the client to relate to the counselor. Now, of course, I really put this down. It could be very, very challenging. And the reason why is because the differing views and viewpoints that the client and counselor might have. And that the biggest challenge for a beginning counselor to have is to separate their own viewpoints and feel for the client with their own. Again, another challenge that might happen is sometimes clients continually disappoint the counselor. You will be working with someone for years. It could be years, and they keep reverting back to abnormal behaviors and going back to the ideal self. But the key here is that even when they do this, you still should hold them in high esteem. And if you do so, the relationship will be preserved. At the very bottom, I found this little cartoon. I tried to blow it up here on another slide, but it just came out so blurry, so I decided to just include it anyway. But it does say using the unconditional positive regard in parenting means loving your kids for what they are, not what they do. Now, of course, this isn't parenting. We aren't parents to our clients, but the principle is similar. We are loving the clients for what they are, not what they do, and still holding them in high regard and recognizing in them a good person that has the willingness and the ability to change. So moving onward, empathy is also one of the major tenets and major factors in person-centered theory. And most like all other counseling, empathy is very important, I feel. Of course, this is different than many of the cognitive theorists, which don't really feel with the client, but some might actually, incorporate empathy. But I feel that if you're going into the counseling profession, then you have this resource available. This is something that's very hard to teach, but emphatic understanding, in this case, again, is not feeling for the client, but is actually feeling with the client, like living, through their experiences and feeling with them. And of course, this doesn't occur completely right off the bat sometimes, but it's a more of a deeper understanding of the client that, again, occurs over time. It's important to note that empathy is not the same as sympathy. Instead, you're actually feeling as if you yourself, the counselor, have experienced this. And that's what I generally note as the importance of empathy. And again, you see this little cartoon that I have, which is, I guess, kind of funny. These two unfortunate souls are going through some pain, and he says, "I know exactly how you feel." And that would be the goal of full emphatic understanding. Now, person-centered therapy has different types of empathy, which is very important. I actually just noticed extra H there, so I apologize for the typo. But there is different types of empathy. The first one is subjective, which is basically what is it like to be the client. Again, putting yourself in the client's shoes and living the client's own experiences in life. The second is interpersonal, which is more along the client's thinking patterns. What I like about the interpersonal one is basically how they communicate with others. And that's a little bit of a social component. And what you really want to look at is how the client is viewing themselves through other people's lenses. It's basically, again, very important to look at this because most likely that ideal self is coming through the interpersonal type of empathy. Finally, the last type is objective, which is the forces outside of the client. And these basically are going to be how the client is viewing themselves, in the outside world, and as well as really you want to look at how they are perceived by others. There's also forces where you want to feel maybe environmental, the client, again, with the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. An objective empathy might be you're looking that they did not have shelter or have enough food or something. Of course, this is going to heavily influence the session itself. Rogers actually contends that personality is developed in a specific way, but again, you see it's the self-concept that is the biggest part of the personality development. The self-concept, again, is your real self compared to that ideal self, and if the real self has been met, then the self-actualization is occurring. What we see here, Rogers always said that individuals raised with unconditional positive regard have a better chance of self-actualization. So you do see, again, this is parenting, environmental factors, support, demographics. This all plays into it, but is not totally determinate because, as we know, we could have clients from very high demographics, but also still are living more in tune with an ideal self, where they are not, their self-concept is lower. So the personality itself is shaped by, again, the individual's willingness to accept themselves. This is principle based, and it's not a stage development. Rogers actually has something called the 19 propositions, which of course I'm not going to list right here, but it's very interesting if you have the opportunity to look it up. I could also direct you into a way to see them quite easily if you want to just ask. But it's, again, most developments are stage, and of course you can see this is very, very different than Freud. This is more not living in the stages, but is more of that based on the self-concept and how that's developed. And again, finally, like I said, living to other expectations will hinder one's own self-actualization. That would be being the ideal self. That would harm the self-concept, and incongruency would begin to occur. Now, Rogers had a very, very positive view on human nature, and this is a little bit of a review, but just to recap here, he did say that clients do have that social component. That is, he did, really influenced again by Alfred Adler, which we spoke about. And the big thing about that is that the social interactive component, it differs in the fact that Rogers felt that our clients do want to be accepted, of course. However, is it the complete necessity that Adler made it, and really the person that has to accept the client would be themselves. That's the key. Not so much as society, but it would be more along the lines of the person, the organism themselves. So the clients have the ability to move forward and their own capacity to move in positive directions. Again, we facilitate that inward journey and move the client into that positive force. Now, the clients themselves are the only ones that truly know what they want from life. And only them are able to navigate themselves from the things that are blocking their growth of what they truly want. Again, they want to live in accordance to what they want, and they should not listen to anybody else or other views, because that would occur with incongruence. Rogers was also someone that really was all for older age counseling, geriatric counseling. He did feel that it was never too late. Changes could always be made. Again, our lives are in constant flux, and someone could still reach authentic living at an older age. And another thing that you see that always pops up are these conditions of worth. And these are things that are put on by society, even sometimes by family members or friends, that hinder our self-growth. Conditions of worth, I like to sum that up as something like, I will like you if ... or I will love you if ... you become a dentist, because we're a family of dentists. Even if the person does not want that, of course, condition of worth and of love will hinder the person's self-actualization if they do not truly want that. It is the opposite of the unconditional positive regard. The conditions of worth are, I will love you if you do something for me or for my expectations. And in the bottom right here, we see a little chart that basically shows how actualization occurs. It is from the organism's valuing and your own positive regard, your positive self-regard for yourself, and that really brings you to the real self. But when incongruence occurs, when society puts those conditions of worth, or your family or your friends, again, the outside sources, instead of the organismic valuing or the unconditional positive regard, there is conditions of regard. And when it's conditional, you start living in accordance to those and you try to reach the ideal self. So again, that social interactive component, we do want to be accepted, and that's why we become incongruent, because we live to others' expectations. So there's a number of goals that this therapy actually aims to try to come out. And of course, the first thing the counselor wants to do is facilitate the client to solve their own problems themselves. Again, this is not something where we're going to be giving advice. The facilitation begins when we move in the journey with the client. The focus in person-centered theory is on the person. It's not on the person's problems. We, in this, are not trying to solve problems for the clients. Rather, we again are facilitating the inward journey for the client to start working out the problems themselves. We believe in this therapy that the counselor themselves knows exactly what they want and will force themselves through this idealism against other people's wishes for other people. Now, the biggest goal here is going to be to discover the real self, who the person truly wants, and let them accept that real self and move towards it. Take the action to do so. Finally, the biggest thing to get to, you need to drop the facades, and that's the masks that people wear. We have to really get to the bottom of everything and to who the client truly is. The person wearing the facades, of course, is in the ideal self, the incongruent, just not being themselves. And the other thing is, what you see with the goals are they're really different than the cognitive focus of therapy. Much different. Again, another goal will minimize the importance of outside conditions of worth. And these are the steps of actualization. This is, if I had a board, I would be writing these on there. But the first thing is walking in and being open to the experience. Then the client will begin to trust in themselves, their real self. They will go on that journey once it's facilitated by the counselor. And then they will always want to continue growth. Remember, again, we're always in flux, continue growing. So here is the approach that a counselor using person-centered theory will use. Again, a non-directive approach, but like we said, this is sometimes probably the most directive. As I said in the first podcast, these are not outward questions per se, and a technique of homework and cognitive thinking that is not occurring. What's occurring is a very deep understanding of the client, which of course could be even scarier than saying, tell me what to do. What is the thing I should do here? Like I just said, there's not any techniques. There's no instructive techniques, no homework. This is more of a conversational approach. A lot of silence. The counselor is the instrument of change with the client. They are the ones to facilitate. That's very important to note. We are also going to be looking at the genuineness. And again, a tough thing for beginning counselors to have is no preconceptions about the client. And these are all interrelated. Of course, this hinges upon a very healthy relationship that the client and counselor will have. So now, what you're going to ask is, how do we do this? If I really like this theory, how are we going to do this? And of course, you will learn this more in Counseling Techniques course, but here's just an overview of what person-centered theorists will use. They use silence very, very well to use almost for power. It signifies something that is said. A very good person-centered theorist will basically become silent and let the client reflect upon that. And this, of course, could be very uncomfortable, but you have to really master it and become comfortable with silence. Again, you're going to believe in the inner resources of the client. The client themselves only know who they really wish to become, and they have those inner resources to change themselves. So you have to have complete belief in the inner resources of the client. You must absolutely work in the here and now. As we said, as Rank said in the, as I said last podcast, again, Rank's here and now. Really have to be very present in the moment and pick up on a lot of nonverbal cues as well as things that remain unsaid, and try to get the client to start looking into those as well. So you're very present, and again, you're going to be active listening. And I feel if you look in the Gloria tape, and if you look in the online resources that I've posted for Carl Rogers, his listening really, he listens with his body as well. He doesn't listen just with his ears. You could see him leaning towards a client and just taking every single thing, even what is not said and what is being said by the nonverbal cues. That is really good active listening, and just a master. If you really want to practice the technique or see how it's done, just watch Carl Rogers in action. Once again, we unconditionally accept the clients for what they are, what they who they truly are, and we attempt to loosen the defense and drop facades. But of course, the counselor themselves has to do this, and I would say very appropriate, very little self-disclosure could start enhancing the relationship, but you also want to be careful with that. So how does change occur in self-centered or person-centered theory? And of course, that is once the self-actualization occurs, the client has been fully changed and is now able to live autonomically. Now, really, many person-centered theorists would argue that the change begins to occur when the client seeks therapy. Once they open the door and walk in, they have begun to change already. And that is pretty true because, again, we are all in flux with one another. And we all are continuously changing. Later person-centered models also do take a stage approach to change. This is later on in Rogers' life. And again, the client will be living in the present, not dwelling on things, looking too far in the future. They will be completely in touch with their own inner workings. They have self-actualized, and they have faith in who they wish to become. They see their thoughts and feelings in the real self, and they also are contributing positively to society. Person-centered theory is also really applied to a wide range of populations and client problems. You will see here, of course, it's great in school counseling, and it's good in group counseling. Crisis intervention has been great. Also, counselors in training. It's very good for people to see how empathy and active listening and unconditional positive regard. Again, I think that these are just amazing things for any counselor to have to enrich the therapy and the experience. So once Carl Rogers did pass away, you do see that there is a few things that have stemmed from person-centered theory. It is, of course, still widely used, very respected. I'd say most beginning counselors start off as person-centered theorists. It's kind of the bare bones, I think, of counseling. I think that it also, like I said, is very universal. Most of the things that are presented and are excellent. And Rogers' daughter, Natalie Rogers, actually has carried the torch quite well. She's still living. And she even incorporated art and a more creative approach to person-centered theory. So I thought that was very cool and important to note. Here's a nice little picture with Carl and his daughter. That, of course, is probably taken during the 80s. She's a little bit older now. And also there's motivational interviewing, which is very brief interventions that are used mainly in the school setting, even sometimes in the prison setting. That was developed by William Miller and Stephen Rolnick pretty recently, within the last 20 years or so, you would see. MI. It usually is seen. So these are two great things to also take a look on if you have the interest in person-centered theory. Finally, of course, we can't ignore the criticisms of person-centered therapy. First off, we would say that critics say there is a lack of structure. It's a little all over the place. I guess you might see that maybe from this podcast. I hope I wasn't all over the place, but the theory itself does not have a structure, and the major tenets are a little bit looser, and each case is going to be different than the next. But also the fact that certain cultural aspects might be tough. For instance, nonverbal cues, there are certain cultures that might struggle with this theory, cultures that are a little bit submissive, that don't want to share too much, might really struggle. There are also that non-directive approach. The clients sometimes are not very receptive towards that. Clients sometimes come into therapy and say, well, tell me what to do. And in this theory, you're really not doing that at all. You're not giving that. You're just facilitating that inward journey. So some of our clients will come looking for advice and techniques, and that's not great with this. So some people might be put off with that. It's also difficult to explain some of these, again, because it's a little bit loose. It's looser, and it works more on the case. So some of the clients might become very frustrated with this type of therapy. Finally, it might also contradict a collectivist culture, a culture that really gets most of their information from others, and it does not value the individual. And again, if you're influenced by a group, this could be problematic. It kind of is in direct contradiction to the principles of this theory. And also, of course, it assumes that the client has cognitive ability, the ability to communicate. Very often you're working with clients that might not be able to do this type of therapy because they might not understand it, or they might have the inability to communicate and to facilitate that inward journey. And here's the last slide. These are just some online resources that I decided to upload for you guys. I do want to tell you I will also be uploading the Gloria videos to the main page in the person-centered and the humanistic learning units. I will put the Gloria videos up, and you will be required to have your online discussion through that. So these are in addition to Gloria tapes that will be posted shortly, if they have not already by the time reviewing this. The first is the Person-Centered Counseling homepage. It's a great in-depth look of Carl Rogers, his legacy, as well as what is currently going on in person-centered counseling. The second link is Natalie Rogers' homepage, and that's in case you were interested in that expressive arts therapy and what she has contributed to person-centered counseling. The third link is a YouTube video of Carl Rogers talking about the therapy and his theory. Very good to see him in action. Kind of just get to see the type of person he was. I think it's very useful to view this in conjunction with the Gloria videos to see how he differs. And finally, you will see Carl Rogers is in that final link. It's a person-centered group video. And I thought that was very interesting just to see how that individualized self-actualization occurs in the group setting. It could be challenging, but I think that is a great resource as well. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I thank you for having patience with me in my first podcast. I hope I did a pretty decent job, that you took things away from it. And I look forward to seeing you all in class. Take care.